Folks, I've had listeners write in to make sure that I've connected with the usual conspiracy sites that are busy hypothesizing about Charlie Kirk's assassination, some indicating that Israel might have been involved. Now, it's always a question as to how far down the rabbit hole we want to go, except for the fact that a fair percentage of your friends may have already disappeared down the hole. Turning Point USA has confirmed some screenshots of text messages indicating that Charlie Kirk admitted to have lost a $2 million donation from a Jewish donor over Charlie's refusal to disinvite conservative commentator Tucker Carlson from his upcoming America Fest. Well, it's supposed to be a motive for another conspiracy. Now, I don't think anybody is seriously considering the notion that Charlie Kirk was an anti-Semite. The last of his interviews indicated that he understood the nuances and difficulties of the war and was very interested in the wars of the nations in the Middle East ceasing. He was pretty upset with the notion that somebody might refer to him as anti-Semitic. Well, one thing you need to realize is the devil works both sides of conspiracies. He's working the real conspiracies and the fake conspiracies at the same time. He's working diversions. It's a full-time business for the devil. But you should also be aware that there is an overarching conspiracy organized by the devil and his friends. He is the god of this world. He has deceived the nations and attempts to displace the true and living God. And then the kings of the earth also set themselves against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let's break his bands asunder and cast away his cords from us, which refers to a rebellion against the law of God. Now that's a conspiracy. But these kings, these conspiratorialists, are actually pretty much in your face these days, and they've managed to get support from the democracies around the world for their evil agenda. So we all know about that. But big picture, here's where we are. We're living in an age of extremes, an age of radicalization, anything but the age of moderation. Moderate is so yesterday. We live in an extreme age of extreme wrongs, both on the right and the left, unhinged insanities. Talk show hosts are increasingly chasing the clicks on the margins because there's quite a bit more to pull on the margins versus the mainstream media. But I'm thankful because maybe, just maybe, Christians will become extremes, extremely right, extremely committed to the right. That is the truth of God, biblical ethics. There's only one real right when you get down to it. We are extremely right because we have the absolute standard of what is right from 4,000, 6,000-year-old revelation from God himself. If there was ever a time that Christians must be on their game, it's now. If there was ever a time that Christians must be rooted and grounded in truth and not be diverted by this conspiracy and that conspiracy, it's now. We need to truly define what is evil by God's law in an age of extremes. And then we present an agenda that is right by God's law and not be diverted from what God has established as his agenda, his priorities, and the things that matter most to him. And I've said this before, I'm sure you've heard it. If there's a smoke bomb going off in the post office, whatever you do, don't go to the post office. Somebody's robbing the bank. So watch out for diversions. Conspiracies are mostly diversions. In a moment, Adam McManus from The Worldview joins me for more of a conversation on conspiracies, some right, some left, some right, some wrong, and some that do affect your life and mind. That's next on Generations. Stay with me. And we are back on the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson with you as well. Adam McManus from theworldview.com is with me on this edition. And Adam, I want to address this issue of conspiracies on now because, hey, a fair percentage of Americans are taken with conspiracy theories. And there is a legitimate conspiracy. The kings of the earth set themselves against the Lord and his anointed. So we know this. But especially in lieu of this story that came out just this morning, Turning Point USA confirmed some screenshots of text messages that indicated Charlie Kirk admitted to have lost $2 million donation from a Jewish donor over Charlie's refusal to disinvite the conservative commentator Tucker Carlson for his upcoming America Fest. Now, that's supposed to be a motive for another conspiracy in relation to Charlie Kirk's assassination. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of of Israel, posted an unusual video to X in which he denied that Israel was involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. So all of that put together, gets some people to think that there were other shooters, there were conspiracy involved, Israel was tied up in this in some way or another, etc. Now, again, I don't want to run down the rabbit hole on this one. I'm sure there are plenty of talk show hosts that are dealing with this and bringing in their surmisings and addressing the quarrelsome and questionable issues that, by the way, the Apostle Paul is always warning Timothy and Titus and in the pastoral epistles, whatever you do, don't get all wound up around the questionable and quarrelsome issues, things that cannot really be proven, et cetera, stuff over which we have so little data. But this has been the fodder of talk shows for a while. Candace Owens is out there. To a lesser degree, Tucker Carlson, etc. All right. So now, as Christians, I think we do need to know how to interact with this. But Adam, one thing for sure, a fair number of Americans, in fact, I think the majority of Americans believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was assisted in some way in the assassination of JFK, for example.
Right. According to a new YouGov survey, 54% believe that Lee Harvey Oswald definitely or probably did not act alone in assassinating John F. Kennedy in 1963. There are other examples of conspiracy theories. People believe, 20% of Americans believe the government used the COVID-19 vaccine to microchip Americans. 20% of Americans believe that the American government was behind the 9/11 attacks. And 18% believe that the 1969 moon landing was staged. I guess my question to you is the suspicion on the part of those who buy into these conspiracy theories just recognizing that there is a sin nature alive and well, and we often don't get the whole story on what's going on, and so therefore they're willing to ascribe all kinds of sometimes crazy reasons behind this or that?
Well, one thing is for sure is Americans don't trust the media. In fact, Americans don't trust almost any of the institutions, as they did, say, in the 1970s. And so, if you look at, I think it was Gallup poll does its Trust in American Institutions survey every year, and you find, there 54% of Americans were thinking highly and trusting the public schools in 1974, and today that's 22%. So that kind of thing has happened because Americans are quite disillusioned with their leaders and with the system, so to speak. Also, a large share of Americans, some 41% of Americans, believe that there's a single group of people who secretly control events and rule the world together. Now, actually, I think there should be about 99% of Americans who believe that there is a God who is in control and ruling the world. Jesus
right.
Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he's over all these things. I'm afraid that there's not a high percentage there, but it's interesting, Adam. Why don't we just change the program to be all about conspiracies? Because we want to be sure we have a 41% listener base. If 41% of Americans, 140 million Americans, believe in a overarching conspiracy in which a single group of people are secretly controlling and ruling the world. Perhaps if we dedicated the program to that, we might get a few more listeners. And it's also very, very interesting that again there tends to be this division in American society today. We live in an age in which, there are increasing numbers of people on the right and on the left who are embracing conspiracy theories. And this is somewhat, I think, unique. I do believe that we are in an age in which talk show hosts are increasingly chasing clicks on the margins.
Yeah.
They're chasing clicks on the margins because there's quite a bit more to pull off the margins today versus mainstream media. What's happened is you've got, a fair percentage of people that are rushing into this margin and a fair percentage rushing into the other margin, such that talk show hosts who measure on this issue of conspiracies are probably going to do very well with the margins. Does that make sense?
Alex Jones, the host of InfoWars, based in the Lone Star State in Austin, was wildly successful monetarily and championed every conspiracy theory there ever was, and probably initiated a number, including the one I referenced previously, that somehow America, the government, was in on the 9/11 event, the terrorist attack. He was taken down because of his outrageous claims related to the shooting of children in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, in a high school by, some mentally deranged young man. And basically, from what I recall, Alex Jones suggested that, all these people were actors. And he ultimately was sued and was, I think, virtually bankrupted by the parents of the Sandy Hook kids who were killed in that school shooting. And I'm glad he was, because he made all kinds of outrageous and hurtful assertions on the air that were not, evidenced.
So, Adam, I tuned into Conspiratorialists earlier this morning. Because I wanted to listen to the talk shows, I thought, I want to check this out. And here's the kind of thing that I heard. Now, I want your feedback on this. Okay, this is the kind of thing. No names. I'm not sharing any names now. I'm just saying I went online. I crawled into the rabbit hole, like 8 inches into it.
Okay.
About 8 inches. Maybe it was closer to 12 inches. Okay, so I'm listening to the Conspiratorialists, and here's what I hear. We don't really like the way this feels. The vibes are off. I feel like there's something wrong. I feel like there's somebody doing something wrong here somewhere. Here's another one. This is quite possible, if not probable, that there are evidences that are forming themselves into a very credible kind of narrative of Charlie Kirk's shooting. This could turn out to be historically important. It could have enormous political consequence. Well, what does that give you? What are you getting here?
A lot of speculation that's not backed up with facts.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of speculation. You're a journalist. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking I want the proof point.
Yeah, and God we trust, all
evidence.
us bring data, right?
Right.
Well, you know what this is? As I was thinking about it, this is clickbait. This is wink, wink, clickbaiting for people who can hardly wait to be drawn into another conspiracy. That's what I'm getting as I'm hearing this.
It almost reminds me of how Proverbs basically condemns gossip, and how those who enjoy gossip have a voracious appetite for it that is seemingly unending. And I think there is something to be said about a certain sector of American culture for whom they have a voracious appetite for all of these conspiracy theories, whether or not there's any documented evidence one way or the other. They just enjoy the thrill of imagining what if, as if it were some kind of sci-fi movie, as opposed to something, like the Charlie Kirk assassination that actually happened.
Now, I understand young folks get drawn into this. I did when I was a kid. I don't know about you, but I'm thinking when I was 17, 18, 19, 20 years of age, I got this book called The Philadelphia Experiment about a ship that disappeared, unified field theory, and somehow, they developed this invisibility thing, and it's called The Philadelphia Experiment. You remember Ripley's Believe It or Not?
Sure.
Or the Bigfoot thing, or the Loch Ness Monster. The pictures. You remember the really, really super fuzzy pictures and so forth. And so, what I'm talking about here. I mean, this is the kind of thing that sort of attracts those young people. As you get older, you kind of say, okay, I was born at night, but not last night. So, I need a little more data than a fuzzy picture of a guy in an ape suit walking through the woods.
Right.
So do you ever give way to any of this yourself?
No, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I have those in my
You didn't
even
read Ripley's Believe It or Not.
I was never interested. No,
Okay.
I didn't give it a passing thought.
It was always the straight facts for Adam.
My dad was a journalist. He
Yeah.
was a Time magazine correspondent,
Yep.
and he was always about the facts. And every night around the dining room table, he would quiz us about the latest news event and asked us for our opinion. And sometimes, as young men are prone to do, we'd go off half-cocked. And he said, well, wait, what's the evidence for that? Where are you coming up with that? What are you talking about? He was always very bare bones. The who, what, when, why, where. And if you don't know what you're talking about, don't make a speculative assertion.
And the big issue for me is the devil works both sides of this. I believe that the devil is involved in real conspiracies. On the one hand, yes, he is. He has got this gigantic conspiracy against God, and the kings of the earth set themselves against the Lord and against his anointed. And he is the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience, right? And we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the rulers of the darkness of this age. So I believe in a spiritual conspiracy. I believe that exists. And yet, on the other side, the devil's pretty good at getting us diverted. Like I say all the time, you've heard me say this before. If there's a smoke bomb in the post office, where do you go? You don't go to the post office, you go to the bank. Somebody's robbing the bank.
A little diversion tactic.
There's so much of this diversion that goes on. The devil is a master of diversion, an architect of fear, paranoia, mass hysteria. He deflects attention from the real enemy to lesser enemies and paper tigers. It's the kind of thing he does. So, Adam, I put together 10 considerations for Christians as they interact with conspiracies. Do you want to hear these?
I do. I'm intrigued.
Well, let me fire them off to you. And I'm doing this because I am concerned about Christians and conservatives who tend to want to run after every other conspiracy that's coming down the pike. And I think that's incipiently unhealthy. Okay, here's the first point. The Christian soberly considers the relative significance of an issue in comparison to everything else going on in the nation, in the world. And here's one of the points. Does it really matter who killed JFK? 65 years later? Does it really matter who bombed the Oklahoma City Federal Building? Does it really matter if the World Trade Center attack was an inside job? Now, the answer may be yes in some instances, but the responsibility for arresting the perpetrators still lies with federal agents, judges, governors, or presidents who are in the position to do so. For the average citizen to assess a little data, cast judgment, does little good unless the right people who are given the jurisdiction will prosecute the crime. And then here's the other thing. Christians shouldn't be focused on one particular sin over all the other sins. Certainly politicians who would provide state monies for killing 1 million children a year and supporting sexual perversion would think nothing of trafficking children for sexual perverse activities. But Christians will condemn all of it on the basis of God's law. In other words, oftentimes we're running after the conspiracy, quote-unquote conspiracies relating to trafficking children, while we're ignoring the 1 million children a year that are slaughtered in abortuaries. Does that make sense? In other words, we've got a diversion that's keeping us focused on the wrong thing, and we're not really considering the relative significance of the issue in comparison to everything else going on in the world. It's a diversion.
Yeah. This idea of giving the American Christendom, as it were, these 10 rules was inspired in your heart because you feel that too often Christians get kind of down the rabbit hole and lose sight of the grand kind of biblical picture? Is that your thought?
I think Christians and conservatives can do this kind of thing. Sure, absolutely. Okay, several other things. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but the Christian is also always sure of the sovereign hand of God over nations and leaders and God's ultimate commitment to justice. That, God's in control. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good, and be sure your sin will find you out. The idea that somehow they're all going to get away with it. No, of course they're not going to get away with it. Okay, and here's another point. The Christian soberly considers whether the matter is a questionable issue. As we've talked about, is it a foolish and ignorant dispute? Are we doting about questions, foolish questions that gender strife? A rational assessment of the evidence, the source of the evidence, the reliability of the witnesses, very much in order. And by the way, I read it on the internet is not enough for a Christian to throw support behind a theory.
I hope not.
We got to be careful with this. Also, Christians are very, very careful. They're not satisfied with defining the enemy in simplistic terms like deep state, the insiders, the swamp, puppet masters, shadows governments, great right-wing conspiracies, etc. Okay, that's not us. We want real definitions, real evidence, real explanations why these evil individuals and groups of people are out there opposing God's laws. That's what we want. Okay,
Well
and then
said.
next, the Christian should avoid participating with that evil done in secret, especially those doctrines and practices of secret societies. So that's one reason why Christians have to be very cautious not to be involved in these quote-unquote secret societies. Okay, also, the Christian soberly considers whether the enemy is being presented by the conspiracy theorist as more sovereign, more powerful, more wise, and more omnipresent than God himself. Does this focus upon conspiracies paralyze right action, hamper faith in God, and curtail hopefulness concerning the future? If so, that kind of thinking is probably from the devil. Okay. Number 7, the Christian will watch out for the trap of secret knowledge about secret conspiracies themselves. This occultic knowledge thing presents itself as something of which others are unaware. Now, once you've got the occultic knowledge, the secret knowledge concerning the secret conspiracy, this may inspire pride as well as a fear of the conspiracy. So we have to be ever so cautious with this quote-unquote occultic knowledge, which, by the way, is very popular amongst a lot of talk show hosts. Okay, and then also, the Christian will also be careful about an anti-establishment mindset that takes a position against anything and all things which the establishment has embraced. If the establishment recommends brushing teeth, this mindset would resist brushing teeth. This bias against all things establishment verges on irrationality and usually fails to work off of hard evidence. We may rightly resist the expansion of state powers or the violation of sphere jurisdictions on principle, but to immediately assume that vaccines are all bad, fluoride in small doses is always unhealthy, artificial sweeteners and processed foods will always produce cancer, microwaving food causes brain damage and immune deficiencies, and cell phone produces brain cancer only because the establishment has approved of these things is overly simplistic thinking. Experimentation on the long-term effects of any substance breathed in or ingested is hard to do, and the results are usually debatable. Such experiments are extremely hard to accomplish without the results being affected by confounding factors. These turn into questionable and quarrelsome issues pretty quickly. Real scientists and thoughtful Christian researchers apply disciplines to their studies so as not to draw arrogant and rash conclusions. They couch their statements with reference to probabilities and sample sizes. They test using double-blind studies, etc. And Christians, of course, must be careful not to countenance a spirit of cynicism and contempt to the point of disrespecting the leaders that God has placed over them. Likewise, also, Jude verse 8 says, "These dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries." And so we're really cautioned on that in Jude verses 8 to 9. Also, the spirit of mistrust and fear usually snowballs into massive instability and disunity in family and church. Where oftentimes you find divorces and broken relationships result from this kind of a heart attitude. And then also Christians must be careful not to violate Matthew 7:1 and 2 themselves. None of us are sinlessly perfect, and to condemn our leaders for the same sins of which we ourselves are guilty clearly violates Matthew 7:1 and 2. Moreover, the leaders of our nation are typically only a reflection of the contemporaneous moral state of the people, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Also, number 10, this is the last one. Above all, Christians commit themselves to truthfulness. When assessing a particular government or ruler among men, we must fairly consider both the positives and the negatives. If the government has done well in some areas, these ought to be duly noted. If the government's doing poorly in other areas, these too should be considered. The Christian will be humble and moderate his confidence in whatever data he's collected, supposedly supporting the conspiracy theory. What confidence does he have in the reporters? Has he thoroughly investigated the witnesses to the conspiracy, their reliability and character? With what confidence can he assume that his witnesses to the conspiracy are any more reliable than those who witnessed the opposite? Are there first-hand witnesses, diary entries, recorded letters, which might connect one person to another? How reliable are the footnotes contained in the reference books? Has he done adequate experiments such that he can reasonably produce a probability relating to the scientific cause and effect relationships that tie into his conclusions? Or does he assume 100% probability to his scientific conclusions? Conspiracy theorists, like modern scientists, often present their case without any check in their hubris, only complete confidence in their conclusions. The U.S. 9/11 conspiracy claim suggested there had been prepositioned charges on the building structure columns before the airliners collided into the buildings. Post-mortem analysis is never conclusive with 100% probability. A sample size of airline airliners running through buildings would have helped the case of the conspiracy theorist to provide some level of probability in favor of the conclusions, but that's hard to do. Real science requires confirmation of hypotheses by experimentation, et cetera, et cetera. So I give all of this as a means by which hopefully to reintroduce rationality into the mind of the Christian at the very least. I came up with this example just recently where some young folks that I ran into are playing around with the idea that the moon landing was fake. Okay. And so, I did a little research and I found out that there were 4 men that walked on the moon, quote unquote, walked on the moon. 3 out of 4 of those guys were Christians. 1, a Presbyterian elder. Okay, so my suggestion, now I don't have 100% confidence one way or the other, right? I can't say I'm 100% confident that everybody is telling the truth relating to the moon landing, et cetera. Now, of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, that would be a real trick to pull off, given that takes, thousands and thousands of people to work the project at the same time. And nobody is going to walk away and say, hey, was it just a big joke? Okay, that's, it's hard for me to consider the possibility of that level of conspiracy maintaining something of an integrity to it over a period of 45 years. Incredibly difficult to do. But given that 3 out of 4 of the men who walked on the moon were Christians, and 1 was a Presbyterian elder, my conclusion was these are brothers in Christ. Let's go interview them.
Yes.
Let's call them up.
I love it.
Where do they live? If they're lying, we need to address that. We need to do Matthew 18 with these brothers. And in fact, we may need to take it to their church and have a proper Matthew 18 assessment, perhaps even excommunications, et cetera. Now, as you enter into this, this consideration, you think to yourself, wow, that's going to take some work. You can't just kind of sit in your basement and click through some websites and trust everything you're reading on the internet. You're actually going to have to do some work. And I guess the big question is, would it be worth it? To go to all of this effort to try to disprove the moon landing. Are you with me, Adam?
Well, I just think it's crazy. There's plenty of evidence that we did land on the moon in terms of photographic evidence and video evidence and the testimonies of those that were there. That's just one of those bizarre claims that I think some tinfoil folks in the basement have lobbed onto, and it provides them some level of entertainment, but it's a bunch of gibberish to me.
But at the end of the day, what you're assuming is that people are lying. So the question is always, who's telling the truth? Well, it's in your it's under your responsibility, your obligation to go and talk to the people on either side of the issue. If this is a big enough issue for you, then you need to go and talk to the people involved on the one side or the other, and you've got to go and do the homework that we've talked about in the program. But here's, I think, what we're talking about also is it's such a diversion. It's such a far out diversion that would divert us from more important things that the Lord God would have us to do.
Exactly.
That we need to consider that to be a quarrelsome
time
and a questionable issue that should not be considered by a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ who's more involved in his Father's business than he is in these diversions. What does 2 Timothy chapter 2 said? That we are, as it were, soldiers, and we need to be focused upon battle and not be taken by worldly diversions. I don't have the verse in front of me, but that's very important for any of and all of us, that we are involved in a very high level spiritual war, and we don't have the time, and we don't have the responsibility nor the interest in engaging ourselves in diversions like this. I think that's the matter that needs to be considered by every young person or any person that is tempted to deal with these quote-unquote conspiracy theories.
I just finished reading through 1 Corinthians today. I read through 1 Corinthians 16, and it had that famous verse 13 that we have engraved on my 15-year-old son Honor's sword that I knighted him with in his biblical manhood ceremony when he turned 13. It says, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. And I think if you apply those four things, being watchful or being on guard, standing firm in the Christian faith, acting like men, being strong, there's really no room for this level of foolish conspiratorial discussion, especially related to something as demonstrably evidenced as the moon landing, for example, or 9/11. There's reason to be suspicious of the government and the media when it comes to, for example, the COVID and the legitimacy of the vaccine or the COVID lockdowns. And we found out subsequently that the Biden administration had put tremendous pressure on big tech, Google, YouTube, to censor conservatives who questioned whether, for example, the mask was scientifically helpful in preventing the spread of the COVID virus, for example. That's a legitimate concern, but I think too much of this other stuff is, as you've said, a distraction, and it is just an embarrassing waste of time. I mean, if the Charlie Kirk assassination should do anything for us, it should remind us of how few days we have on this earth that the Lord has given us, and we need to invest them wisely in the kingdom of God, not in foolish conspiracy theories.
You're right. I mean, we need to be able to distinguish between majors and minors, my friends, especially when it comes to these issues of social issues, political issues, moral issues of the day, the violation of sphere jurisdiction during the COVID-19 years, the health of the family, the right of the church to assemble, the right to life, the strengthening of the family. These are the things that are desperately needed today. Yes. In our society. And it's not for us to be diverted off of the important issues, as we've been talking about on this edition of the program. You must therefore endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. That's 2 Timothy 2, verses 2 and 3. And that wraps up this edition of the Generations broadcast. Friends, you can interact with the program by emailing me at host@generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Adam McManus inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.